After a fiery exchange between US President Donald Trump and Joe Biden, many people turned up at bars and restaurants to watch the broadcast of their running mates debate. But the relatively calm exchange between Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic contender Kamala Harris lacked theatrics and answers. Instead, the candidates spent their time criticizing each other's political records. Harris highlighted what she says is the Trump administration's poor handling of the coronavirus pandemic.
The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan.
Pence responded by accusing Harris of undermining public confidence.
The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives.
By the end of the debate, voters were no wiser about the candidates' plans for improving healthcare, creating jobs, and providing immediate support for struggling workers and businesses.
I think they've both done a good job of pressing their individual agendas at this debate. Answering the questions, maybe not as much, but definitely they've done better about pushing their own agenda in the debate.
Democrats and Republicans remain at odds over an economic stimulus package, but there may be a glimmer of hope for at least one industry. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi have reportedly discussed providing $25 billion in government funding to U.S. airlines. That would help carriers retain tens of thousands of workers who would otherwise have been laid off. But President Trump has instructed his team to stop negotiating a broader economic stimulus until after the election. He's also refused to take part in the next presidential debate after organizers said it would take place virtually. And that means a longer wait for those hoping for answers and money. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
For more on this, Nate Lerner joins us now from New York. He's a Democratic strategist and executive director of Build the Wave, a progressive grassroots organization. And joining him from Washington is Adolfo Franco. He's a Republican strategist and former advisor to the late Senator John McCain. Welcome to you both. Nate, could I begin with you and the latest on the negotiations over a stimulus deal? Now, Nancy Pelosi has now refused to approve a standalone relief package for America's struggling airlines in the absence of a broader stimulus package. Now, we know airlines have been laying off thousands of workers in recent weeks and months. Isn't Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats just holding these workers to ransom by refusing to approve this one standalone measure just because she won't get a much bigger deal?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair. Democrats, like Republicans, want to help out the airlines. We're just as concerned as they are. The issue is that it's a standalone aid package. It's not helping the workers out there, the folks who aren't working. The folks who lost their jobs through no fault of their own due to the pandemic, the small businesses that are struggling due to the pandemic, people who are struggling to pay rent. There's tens of millions of Americans who don't know how they're going to pay rent at the end of the month, or are struggling to put food on the table and have to often choose between their prescriptions or food or rent. That's not a choice we want Americans to be making right now. And the president just wants to score a quick political victory by getting aid to the airlines and helping his CEO friends there. And he's not doing anything, and Republicans aren't doing anything to help Americans as a whole. And that's why the president said recently that he's going to end stimulus talks with Democrats until after the election, which is absolutely absurd. He's the one holding the American people hostage, not Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats, who are fighting for a larger, more comprehensive stimulus package and are working to pass that to make sure that all Americans are taken care of, not just large corporations like airlines.
Okay, Adolfo, can I bring you in on this point as well? So we know lawmakers in the Democratic-controlled Congress have passed their $2.2 trillion stimulus package, which includes everything that Donald Trump has called for, including aid for struggling airlines, relief measures for small businesses, as well as $1,200 stimulus checks for individuals. Why then don't Republicans just agree with what's been passed in Congress? If they want to help Americans out as they say they do, why are they refusing to approve what the Democrats have put on the table?
Because unfortunately, of that $2.2 billion, a lot of that is unrelated to the coronavirus. And of course, we want to help struggling Americans. First, let me tell you, I hope your guest, Nate, can explain it to the tens of thousands of flight attendants, mechanics, airline employees who would be the beneficiary of this, and not CEOs, it's working people. The president is willing to do of that $2.2 billion package, all of it that it's related to the virus. But there's an important point here. In that package, there are things like abortion funding for the Hyde Amendment. And the previous packages, there have been things for the Kennedy Center and Arts Program here in Washington, D.C. They've thrown in everything. And in addition to that, bailouts for a lot of non-corona related expenses for badly managed Democratic states and cities. So the president sensibly has said, let's take it piece by piece. And the areas where we can agree, not just airlines. Airlines is the first piece, as you correctly reported here on your network. We'll take this piece by piece. Yes to Nate. We'll do the small businesses. We'll do all these helping people, all this stuff the Democrats are telling you. But in this enormous bill, there are hundreds of millions of dollars to the tune of really $1 trillion unrelated to the coronavirus. And that we are not willing to do. So we'll take it piece by piece. If they're so concerned, as they say they are, as we are, about working people, we will do it for the airlines. We will do it for the food industry. We will do it for small businesses. We will do all that we need related to the pandemic. Not abortion, not Planned Parenthood, not the arts funding, and not their leftist agenda, which they're throwing into what we call here in Washington a Christmas tree bill.
Okay. No, Nate, what's wrong with that approach then, this piecemeal approach whereby the Democrats agree to individual measures that, I guess, in the meantime, before they agree on a much broader package, would help thousands of workers, millions of individuals?
I mean, that approach sounds good in theory, unless you look at what Congress has done over the last 8 months, which is almost nothing. You know, we're one of the only countries industrialized countries on Earth that has really only had one stimulus bill. There's been very little movement since the last stimulus bill to help Americans in any meaningful way outside of what's being done at the state level. Here in New York, we're doing a great job providing aid to folks who can't pay their rent by putting a moratorium on evictions. But we're not seeing anything like that nationally. Congress has not stepped up and do their job, and Democrats are the ones are leading the fight to get this done, leading the fight to make sure that Americans are being helped. And it's Republicans who are the ones who are getting in the way and stopping it because they're cherry picking small little issues they have with each little stimulus package where, a little too much money is going to the arts here, or a little too much money is going to Planned Parenthood there. So we're going to throw this whole bill out. That's outrageous. And that's exactly the problem Democrats face every day when they're trying to pass this legislation. And so you're saying, we're going to take it, industry by industry or one issue at a time. Well, Congress is horrendously unproductive and ineffective right now because of the division, because of the partisanship, because Republicans refuse to work with Democrats across the aisle, because Trump, for example, just ended the progress we were making in order for God knows why, in a tweet a few days ago. So, I really don't trust that to happen. What we need is one big stimulus bill. And yes, is it going to have some issues? It will, absolutely, on both sides. Just the same way that, Democrats are going to give maybe a little too much money to the arts and Planned Parenthood, Republicans are going to give way too much money to the corporations and the wealthy and hedge funds and Kanye West who don't deserve it. So, we have to make some concessions. And what's more important is that Americans get the aid they need, not that we score political victories.
Okay, let's move on to the first and only vice presidential debate that we saw on Wednesday night. Now, Adolfo, can I ask you about how Mike Pence performed? We know the vice president is officially the head of the country's coronavirus task force, yet America has more than 7 million infections. More than 210,000 people have died from the coronavirus. Many medical experts say thousands of lives could have been saved if simple measures such as mask wearing were advocated at the beginning of this pandemic. Mike Pence has failed miserably in his job as the head of the coronavirus task force, hasn't he?
I think he's performed magnificently, and so has the president. It's very hard to prove a negative, but Dr. Fauci, who is very much respected in our country and one of the leading experts on this matter advising the government, has said that President Trump's actions, specifically with respect to the ban on travel from China and then subsequently from Europe, saved millions of lives. Those were his words, millions of lives, something that Vice President Biden strongly criticized as xenophobic, hysterical, and unnecessary for a long period of time. Last night when you had the vice president pointedly ask Senator Harris what their plan was, she's right. Joe Biden has a history of plagiarism. And this is exactly, everything she articulated is exactly what the administration has been doing. There isn't anything new. What is remarkable is that Dr. Klein, Joe Biden's medical advisor, early on in this, these were his words in February, Vice President Biden's words, this is not anything to worry about. So this is after the president had banned travel from China and he was being strongly criticized. That it's a pandemic, that people are going to lose their lives in the US and globally? Yes. Is our mortality rate lower than in most other countries and declining? Yes. Is the fact that the president's actions saved millions of lives? Yes.
Can I just interrupt you there, Adolfo? But his inaction in other parts of the response, such as taking months before he actually advocated on mask wearing, by tweeting people to rise up against the various lockdown measures in various states. I mean, you must concede that those actions really threatened the lives of thousands of Americans and ultimately raised the death toll.
I don't share that view. First of all, in February 6th, Dr. Fauci, the same Dr. Fauci, recommended against mask wearing. Mask wearing was mocked just a few months ago. There's been back and forth on mask wearing. And the CDC today, it's still an optional issue for people to use masks. I'm sure it's a recommendation, but it's not a requirement. But more importantly is, in our country, the only colossal mistakes were made by two Democrat governors, Governor Murphy of New Jersey and Nate's governor, Mario Cuomo, sending knowingly COVID-positive people into nursing homes, elderly people. That's why those two states amount to the vast majority of the deaths in the U.S., and they are a consequence of the actions of two Democrat governors, not the president of the United States, who responded very quickly with ventilators, with all types of medical equipment. And frankly, we have the tapes to show the praise from governors, Democrat governors like Cuomo, Murphy, and Newsom, saying that the president was doing fantastic work. And that's their words, not mine.
Okay.
So they hold the responsibility for at least 30 or 40% of the deaths by just
Adolfo, I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, but we're running out of time. So Nate, can I just bring you in on Kamala Harris's performance at the debate? We know the pandemic was a major fixture of the argument between the two candidates, but she really did fail in trying to bring Vice President Pence to account on the White House's handling of the pandemic, didn't she? She could have gone stronger. Why didn't she?
That's a good question. I think a lot of Democrats, too, is expected to see the Kamala Harris that we've seen at Senate committee hearings, where you really see that, that prosecutor-style approach where her experience as a prosecutor comes through and as an attorney general comes through. But honestly, she didn't need that because the Biden campaign is ahead so much. She came into this debate with a conservative style and approach, and that was what any political consultant, any political expert would advise doing. You don't want to take any risks. She doesn't need to beat up Mike Pence, to tear him down. She just needs to tie the debate. That's a win. As long as there's no major errors, as long as people don't come away, feeling negatively towards her or towards Joe Biden, that was the goal, and that was exactly what she accomplished. She was incredibly smooth, incredibly controlled, answered the questions perfectly in my mind. Didn't make any errors whatsoever. She's being attacked for her facial expressions. If that's the worst thing you can say about Kamala Harris's performance, that's a pretty That speaks pretty highly of it and what she did. And at the same time, Mike Pence was the one. The onus was on him to have a big, dazzling performance. And yes, he was smooth, but he dodged a ton of questions. People, I think, were very frustrated that he really showed that he doesn't have answers for a lot of these questions. And he was the one that had to make waves, and he fell short of that. Kamala Harris did exactly what she needed to do. And if they need her to step up and beat down on Trump and Mike Pence, we know she's capable of that, but she didn't need to do that. And so she did her job.
Okay, well, gentlemen, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. But Nate Lerner in New York and Adolfo Franco in Washington, thank you both again for joining us on the program.